The Tuesday morning sunshine streamed through my kitchen window as I sat with my coffee and newspaper, savoring the quiet routine I'd perfected over 8 years of widowhood. At 64, I'd learned to appreciate the small pleasures: fresh ground coffee, the morning crossword, and the peaceful silence of my Millbrook home. Then my phone rang, and Maya's name on the screen made me smile automatically. My daughter's calls were always the highlight of my day. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, but the silence that followed made my stomach clench. "Mom," Maya's voice was barely a whisper, strained and shaking. "I'm sorry to call so early, but we need help." I set down my coffee immediately. In 30 years as an insurance investigator, I'd learned to recognize genuine distress, and my daughter's voice carried the unmistakable weight of desperation. "What's wrong, honey?" "Brandon lost his job 2 months ago." The words tumbled out in a rush. "We've been trying to manage, but the bills keep coming. The mortgage, the car payments, Maya's credit cards. We're 3 months behind on everything." My heart broke hearing the shame in her voice. Maya had always been independent, working as a dental assistant since graduation, proud of building a life with Brandon. For her to call me meant things were truly desperate. "How much do you need?" I asked, already mentally calculating my checking account balance. "No, Mom, it's not about money. Well, not just money." She took a shaky breath. "Could Brandon and I maybe stay with you for a while? Just until he finds something new. I know it's a lot to ask, but we don't have anywhere else to go." The relief in her voice when I immediately said yes nearly brought me to tears. My little girl, 32 years old and too proud to ask for help until she had no choice. "Of course you can come home, both of you. This house is too big for just me anyway. Really, Mom, thank you." "Thank you so much. I promise we won't be a burden. Brandon's been interviewing constantly, and I'm picking up extra shifts at Dr. Morrison's office. We'll be back on our feet soon." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen planning the adjustments I'd need to make. Clear out the guest room closet, stock up on groceries for 3 people, maybe get extra keys made. Simple logistics for what felt like the right thing to do. But something nagged at me about Maya's explanation. Brandon had worked for Synthex Corporation for 8 years. She'd said, good employee reviews, stable position in their accounting department. The layoffs had been sudden, unexpected. Yet when I'd pressed for details, Maya's answers seemed vague. "Brandon handles our finances," she'd explained. "He's managing the job search, too. I trust him to figure it out." Trust, in my line of work. I'd seen too many cases where trust became a weapon against the innocent. But this was family. This was my daughter's husband, the man she'd chosen to build a life with. Still, as I finished my coffee and started planning their homecoming, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning I'd learned to heed over 3 decades of investigating fraud: always trust your instincts, and always verify the story. Friday afternoon arrived with the rumble of a U-Haul truck in my driveway. I watched from my front window as Maya and Brandon climbed out. Maya looking exhausted but grateful. Brandon surveying my neighborhood with what seemed like professional interest. Maya hugged me tight on the doorstep, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for this. Mom, I don't know what we would have done." "This is your home, sweetheart. It always will be." Brandon approached with that practiced smile I'd noticed at their wedding 3 years ago, at 33. He was undeniably handsome 6'1", with dark hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Elena, I can't thank you enough," he said, embracing me briefly. "This is incredibly generous." As we unloaded their belongings, I noticed they had far more possessions than I'd expected for a temporary stay. Boxes labeled Brandon's office. Important papers. Electronics, enough stuff to fill half my garage. "Wow," Brandon said, walking through my living room with obvious appraisal. "This is a beautiful place. Elena, original hardwood floors, crown molding, must be worth, what, $400,000 in today's market. The comment struck me as oddly specific for casual conversation, but Maya laughed. Brandon's always been good with property values. Comes from working in corporate finance. He continued his assessment as I showed them around. Great bones to this house. When was it built? 1980s. And you've been here how long? 15 years, I replied, watching him mentally catalog room layouts, window placements, sightlines. Since Robert and I retired. Must feel big for just one person. Good thing you have family to fill it up again. That evening over dinner, Brandon asked countless questions about my routines. What time did I usually go to bed? Did I have a cleaning service? How often did I check my mail? Did any neighbors have spare keys? All perfectly innocent questions from someone trying to adjust to a new living situation. Except something in his manner, the way he leaned forward when I mentioned my Tuesday grocery runs. How his eyes sharpened when I described my predictable schedule made me feel like I was being interviewed rather than welcomed into casual conversation. The neighborhood watch is pretty active, I mentioned, testing his reaction. Really? What kind of activities do they watch for? Oh, the usual strange cars, people who don't belong. Mrs. Chen across the street has lived here 20 years. She knows everyone's business. Brandon nodded thoughtfully. Good to know the neighbors are observant. And as we cleaned up after dinner, Maya seemed happier than I'd seen her in months. Having her home felt wonderful, but Brandon's presence carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. He moved through my house like he was memorizing it, asked questions that felt like reconnaissance, and watched me with an intensity that made my trained investigator instincts prickle. But Maya loved him, and she needed my help. I pushed my concerns aside and focused on being the supportive mother she needed. That night, lying in bed, I heard their voices through the walls, Maya's grateful and relieved, Brandon's lower and more calculating. I couldn't make out words, but the tone difference was striking. Maya sounded like someone who'd found safe harbor. Brandon sounded like someone making plans. The first week with Maya and Brandon felt like a return to the family life I'd missed since Robert's death. I cooked breakfast for 3 people again, listened to Maya's stories about her patients at the dental office, and enjoyed having voices and laughter fill my empty house. Maya slipped back into old routines easily, helping with dishes, sharing memories of her childhood in these same rooms. She seemed genuinely happy to be home, often hugging me spontaneously and saying how much she'd missed our time together. Brandon played his part perfectly too. He called me Mom Elena with apparent affection, brought me beer when I watched the evening news, and offered to help with yard work or minor repairs. To an outside observer, we looked like the ideal extended family weathering a temporary crisis together. But I noticed things. Brandon's job interviews followed no logical pattern. Some days he'd leave dressed professionally and return hours later with no coffee stains on his shirt, no scent of office buildings or business meetings. Other days, he'd claim phone interviews but spend hours walking around my neighborhood, returning with detailed knowledge of which houses had cars and driveways, which had security systems, which elderly residents lived alone. He also seemed to know my schedule better than I'd shared. When I mentioned stopping by the bank on Wednesday, he'd casually ask if I was making a large deposit. When I planned my Friday hair appointment, he'd note that I'd be gone for exactly 2 hours. When I picked up prescriptions, he'd wonder aloud about what medications I took and where I kept them. Most unsettling. Brandon had begun asking questions that felt like financial reconnaissance disguised as friendly concern. Elena, you mentioned you worked in insurance for 30 years. Must have built up a good retirement nest egg. I'm curious about your home security setup. A woman living alone with valuable things. You must have some kind of system. Do you keep much cash around the house for emergencies? That's a beautiful jewelry collection. Family heirlooms. Each question came wrapped in care and casual conversation, but together they painted a clear picture, someone inventorying my assets and vulnerabilities, someone who wanted to know exactly what I had and how to get it. Maya remained oblivious to the subtext, trusting her husband completely and grateful for what seemed like his genuine interest in my well-being. When I tried to gently probe about their financial situation, she deferred to Brandon's expertise. "He's handling the job search and our budget," she'd say. "Brandon's always been better with money than me." But as the week progressed, I began to suspect that Brandon's relationship with money might be more complicated than Maya understood. Phone calls he took in private, mail that arrived addressed to him at my house from financial institutions I didn't recognize, and a tension in his shoulders that grew more pronounced with each passing day. On Sunday night, I made a decision that would change everything. As a former insurance investigator, I'd learned to trust evidence over assumptions, but I'd also learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Brandon Hayes was hiding something significant from my daughter, and I was going to find out what. Sunday night found me in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea and a mystery novel, enjoying the quiet after Maya and Brandon had gone to bed. At nearly 11 p.m., the house had settled into comfortable silence. Then I heard Brandon's voice from the back patio. I set down my book and moved closer to the kitchen window. Through the glass, I could see him pacing on my deck. Phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Yeah, I'm inside the target. Clean neighborhood, single woman, definitely has assets." My blood went cold. Target. The clinical language sent every alarm bell from my investigative years into overdrive. "Insurance company called back yet?" Brandon continued. "Good. Keep monitoring the claim. We need to know exact payout amounts before we move forward." I pressed closer to the window, straining to hear more, but Brandon's voice dropped even lower. Something about timeline and assessment period and minimal risk exposure. When Brandon ended the call and headed inside, I quickly returned to my chair, mind racing. The terminology could be innocent insurance work, often involved assessing properties and claims, but the way he'd said target and single woman made my skin crawl. I lay awake most of that night, analyzing what I'd heard. 30 years of investigating insurance fraud had taught me to distinguish between legitimate business calls and something darker. Brandon's conversation felt like the latter, but I needed more information before jumping to conclusions. The next morning, Brandon seemed relaxed and cheerful at breakfast, showing no signs that his late-night call had been anything unusual. He asked Maya about her schedule, mentioned he had follow-up interviews planned, and complimented my coffee with his usual charm. But when Maya left for work, Brandon's demeanor shifted slightly. He lingered in the kitchen, studying my routine as I cleaned up. "Elena, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have good insurance coverage on this house, with property values rising? You want to make sure you're adequately protected." The question felt loaded now, given what I'd overheard. "I review my policies annually," I said carefully. "Smart. A lot of seniors don't realize they're underinsured until it's too late." He paused, as if considering something. "Have you had any recent claims damage from that storm last month? Maybe—" I hadn't mentioned any storm damage because there hadn't been any significant weather, but Brandon seemed to expect a particular answer, as if he knew something I didn't. "No damage," I said, watching his reaction carefully. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Disappointment. Confusion. Then his smooth smile returned. "That's good news. Prevention is always better than dealing with insurance companies after the fact." As Brandon headed upstairs, supposedly to make job search calls, I made my own call to my insurance agent. Everything was normal. No unusual inquiries about my policies, no pending claims or assessments, which meant Brandon's conversation the night before wasn't about legitimate insurance business involving my property. It was about something else entirely. something that involved targeting a single woman with assets. Wednesday morning, I decided to run my usual errands with heightened awareness. The overheard phone call had sharpened my investigative instincts, and I wanted to see if Brandon's interest in my financial habits was more than casual curiosity. At First National Bank, I conducted my normal business, depositing a Social Security check and withdrawing $500 cash for the week. As I finished with the teller, a familiar voice behind me made me turn. Elena. What a coincidence. Brandon stood in line for the customer service desk, dressed professionally and carrying a folder. His smile seemed genuine, but his eyes quickly noted the cash I was tucking into my purse. That's quite a bit of cash to carry around, he said as we walked outside together. A lot of crime targeting seniors these days. I prefer cash for the farmer's market and tips for my gardener, I explained, testing his reaction. Of course. Do you usually keep much cash at home for emergencies? The question was too specific, too pointed. A normal person might express general concern about safety, but Brandon wanted exact information about my cash storage habits. I keep what I need, I replied vaguely. Brandon persisted. Maya mentioned you're very organized about your finances. Safety deposit box for important documents. I hadn't told Maya about my safety deposit box recently, which meant Brandon had either been asking her specific questions about my banking habits or had observed more about my routines than seemed natural. Most people our age have safety deposit boxes, I said neutrally. As we parted ways in the parking lot, Brandon mentioned he needed to update his address with unemployment services, but when I called the bank later that afternoon, the customer service representative confirmed that no one had inquired about my accounts or made any address changes associated with my information. Brandon hadn't been at the bank on legitimate business. He'd been there to observe my banking patterns, learn my habits, and gather information about my financial situation. That evening, I called my old partner from the insurance investigation unit, Detective Sarah Wong, who'd retired to Arizona the previous year. Elena, how's retirement treating you? After catching up, I casually mentioned Maya and Brandon's situation. Sarah, still sharp from decades of detective work, immediately picked up on my underlying concerns. Want me to run a background check on him, professional courtesy? Just basic information. Maya's my only child, and I want to make sure... Say no more. Give me his full name and approximate age. 24 hours later, Sarah called back with information that made my blood run cold. Elena, your daughter's husband has a record. 2 arrests for credit card fraud in Phoenix. Charges dropped both times due to lack of evidence. More concerning, he was terminated from Synthex Corporation not for layoffs, but for embezzlement. $8,000 in false expense reports and unauthorized withdrawals. My hands trembled as I wrote down the details. Does Maya know? According to the termination paperwork, Synthex didn't press charges to avoid negative publicity. It's possible he told her a different story. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at my notes. Brandon hadn't lost his job due to company downsizing. He'd been fired for stealing. Maya had no idea she was married to a man with a criminal record who specialized in financial fraud. And now he was living in my house, studying my routines, and asking detailed questions about my assets. Friday morning, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I couldn't confront Maya with accusations about her husband without concrete proof. But I also couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that Brandon posed a real threat. I would investigate him the same way I'd investigated suspicious insurance claims for 30 years methodically, carefully, and with detailed documentation. My first step was understanding exactly what Brandon was doing during his supposed job interviews. I started tracking his departures and returns, noting inconsistencies between his claimed activities and his actual behavior. Monday, left at 9 a.m. in interview clothes. Returned at 3 p.m. with fast food receipt time-stamped at 2:15 p.m. Claimed he'd been in meetings all day. Tuesday, said he had phone interviews. But I observed him walking through the neighborhood for 2 hours. stopping to talk with Mrs. Chen and asking questions about other residents. Wednesday, claimed lunch meeting with potential employer, but returned with library parking receipt and computer printouts about home security systems. The pattern was clear. Brandon wasn't job hunting. He was conducting surveillance. Next, I began paying closer attention to his questions and comments, writing them down immediately after each conversation. Do you ever travel visit relatives? What time do you usually go to bed? Do you have a cleaning service? When do they come? That's a nice jewelry collection. Do you keep it in a safe? Have you updated your will recently? Maya should know where important documents are kept. Each question individually might seem normal, but together they formed a comprehensive security assessment. Brandon was mapping my routines, identifying my vulnerabilities, and cataloging my valuables. On Thursday evening, I took the next logical step. Using skills I'd developed investigating fraud cases, I began documenting Brandon's behavior with photographic evidence. When he left for his Friday interview, I followed at a distance in my car. Brandon drove to the public library, spent 2 hours on computers in the business section, then met with a man I didn't recognize in the parking lot of a coffee shop. Their conversation was brief but intense, with Brandon handing over what looked like photographs and the other man giving him cash. I managed to photograph both men and got the license plate number of the other man's car. When I ran it through resources Sarah had taught me to access, the registered owner was Derek Miller, age 45 with a criminal record including loan sharking, extortion, and organized fraud schemes. Brandon wasn't just conducting reconnaissance on my house and finances. He was working with a known criminal who specialized in targeting vulnerable adults for financial crimes. That night, I lay awake planning my next moves. I had enough evidence to prove Brandon was dangerous, but I needed to catch him in the act to protect Maya from the emotional devastation of learning she'd married a criminal who was planning to rob her mother. I also needed to ensure that whatever Brandon was planning would be stopped before he could hurt either of us. As a former investigator, I knew that the best way to catch a predator was to let them think they were succeeding while carefully controlling every aspect of their crime. Brandon wanted to rob me. Fine. Let him try. But he was about to learn that some old women bite back. Tuesday afternoon of the third week, Maya's book club meeting provided the perfect opportunity to confirm my suspicions about Brandon's true intentions. I told them I was going to my usual Tuesday gym session, but instead I parked around the corner and walked back to observe my own house. Maya left for her book club at 6:45 p.m., kissing Brandon goodbye and reminding him that dinner leftovers were in the refrigerator. I watched from Mrs. Chen's garden shed. With her permission, I'd finally confided in my neighbor about my concerns as Brandon waited exactly 10 minutes after Maya's departure before springing into action. What I witnessed confirmed my worst fears. Brandon moved through my house with practiced efficiency, clearly following a predetermined plan. He went straight to my home office and began photographing documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, property tax records. He used his phone to take high-resolution images of every financial document he could find. But the most chilling moment came when Brandon opened my rarely used safe using a key I kept hidden in my kitchen junk drawer, a key I had never told Maya about. Which meant Brandon had been systematically searching my house during previous unsupervised moments. From my hiding spot, I watched him photograph the contents of my safe and then call someone immediately. Yeah, it's Derek. I'm in. Old lady has way more than we thought. Found new bank statements showing $340,000 in checking, plus $180,000 in investment portfolio. My blood ran cold as I realized Derek Miller, the loan shark I'd identified, was his contact. Easy target, Brandon continued. Maya suspects nothing. Still thinks I'm job hunting like a good husband. The contempt in his voice when he mentioned my daughter made me clench my fists. This man was not only planning to rob me, he was actively manipulating and betraying the woman who loved him. "Friday night is perfect timing," Brandon said. "Maya's working a late shift at the dental clinic until 10 p.m. I'll drug the old lady's evening tea, wait 30 minutes for her to go unconscious, then clean out the safe completely." "Derek, I need this to work. 47,000 in gambling debts, plus your interest rates. My wife might have an accident if I don't pay up soon." The threat against Maya made everything crystal clear. Brandon wasn't just a common thief. He was a desperate man backed into a corner by dangerous people, and he was willing to risk both Maya's and my life to solve his problems. As Brandon ended his call and continued photographing my documents, I carefully retreated to my car and drove to the gym to establish my alibi, but my mind was racing with plans. Brandon wanted to drug me Friday night perfect. I would be ready for him. Wednesday morning, I began preparations that would determine whether Brandon succeeded in his crime or walked into the most comprehensive trap of his criminal career. My first stop was Tech Mart, where a helpful young employee named Tyler explained wireless security cameras designed for home use. I selected a compact model with night vision, motion detection, and smartphone connectivity technology that would have seemed impossible during my early career, but was now readily available to any concerned homeowner. "Lot of break-ins in your area?" Tyler asked as I paid cash for the camera and installation supplies. "Something like that. I need clear footage with good audio quality. This model streams directly to cloud storage, so even if someone finds the camera, you'll have permanent records." "Perfect. Brandon might be planning a crime, but I was planning a prosecution. Back home, I spent the afternoon testing camera placement in my bedroom using the smartphone app, the device needed to capture Brandon's approach to my safe, his actions inside the room, and most importantly, his face clearly enough for legal identification. After trying several positions, I found the perfect spot nestled between books on my dresser, angled to cover both the safe and the center of the room. The magnetic mount held securely, and the camera's black casing blended seamlessly with my book spines. I tested the motion activation sensitivity, ensuring it would trigger when someone entered the room, but not from normal house settling or outside noise. Battery life was crucial. The camera needed to operate from Thursday evening through Friday night, potentially 12 hours. Next, I prepared the psychological component of my trap. Brandon expected to find me helpless and unconscious Friday night, so I needed to appear vulnerable while maintaining complete control of the situation. I purchased chamomile tea and melatonin supplements, creating props for the drugging scenario Brandon planned. I also researched symptoms of the sleeping medication Brandon would likely use, so I could fake unconsciousness convincingly if necessary. Most importantly, I prepared evidence collection tools. In addition to the hidden camera, I downloaded voice recording apps to my smartphone and tested their sensitivity and clarity. I practiced activating recording mode quickly and silently. Thursday evening, I conducted a full rehearsal. I positioned the camera, tested recording functions, and practiced the timing of my responses to various scenarios Brandon might attempt. If he drugged my tea, I would dump it discreetly and fake unconsciousness. If he entered my bedroom, every action would be recorded. If he threatened me directly, I had 911 pre-dialed on my phone. If he discovered my surveillance, I had pepper spray within reach. As I finalized my preparations, I realized that tomorrow night would determine not just my safety, but Maya's future. If I succeeded in exposing Brandon's true nature with irrefutable evidence, my daughter would be free to rebuild her life without a dangerous criminal. If I failed, both of us could end up victims of Brandon's desperation and Derek Miller's threats. But I had 30 years of investigative experience, modern technology, and the element of surprise. Brandon expected to find a helpless, elderly woman. Instead, he would face a trained professional who had been anticipating his every move. Thursday night at 11:47 p.m., lying in my bed with the lights off and my phone recording app ready, I heard Brandon's footsteps move through the house below. He was being careful, avoiding the spots on the stairs that creaked, moving with the confidence of someone who had memorized every sound my house made over 3 weeks of residence. I heard the soft murmur of his voice from the living room and activated my recording app, straining to catch every word that might be evidence. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep. The old bitch has way more than we thought. Found new bank statements today." The casual cruelty in his voice when referring to me made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to remain still and keep recording. Maya suspects nothing, still thinks I'm job hunting like a devoted husband. Friday night is perfect timing. She's working late shift at the dental clinic until 10 p.m. Gives me over 4 hours to work. I'll drug her evening tea with crushed Ambien, enough to knock her out for 8 hours minimum. Wait 30 minutes to make sure she's unconscious. Then use the safe key I copied weeks ago. Clean out all cash, jewelry, anything portable and valuable. My hands trembled as I held the phone steady. Brandon had copied my safe key weeks ago, meaning he'd been planning this crime almost since the day he moved in. "Derek, I know you're worried about the timeline, but my gambling debts aren't going away. Those guys you work with aren't exactly patient about $47,000 plus interest." So Derek Miller was more than just Brandon's contact. He was representing other criminals who had fronted Brandon money for gambling, and now they were demanding payment through whatever means necessary. The beauty is she'll never suspect family. Even if she figures out something's missing later, Maya will convince her that old people just misplace things. You know how confused they get about their memory. The psychological manipulation was as disturbing as the planned theft. Brandon intended to use Maya's love and trust to gaslight me into questioning my own memory and perception. Trust me, by Thursday we'll be clear. I'll tell Maya we got a sudden job offer in another state, something urgent that requires immediate relocation. We'll be gone before the old lady fully realizes what happened. Yeah, well, maybe she should have been more careful about who she let into her house. Life lesson, right? Brandon's laugh after that comment was the most chilling sound I'd ever recorded. Here was a man planning to drug and rob his wife's mother, then disappear with his victim's daughter as an unwitting accomplice, and he found the situation amusing. The call ended, and I heard Brandon moving around downstairs for another few minutes, probably checking locks or making final preparations for tomorrow night's crime. When I heard his footsteps on the stairs and the guest room door close, I stopped the recording and lay in the darkness, processing what I'd learned. Brandon wasn't just planning theft. He was planning to incapacitate me with potentially dangerous drugs, steal my life savings, then kidnap my daughter by manipulating her into fleeing the state as an accessory after the fact. Maya would wake up Saturday morning as the daughter of a robbery victim and the wife of a criminal, possibly facing legal consequences for money she didn't know was stolen. But Brandon had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed I was just another vulnerable senior citizen, easy to manipulate and impossible to defend against his scheme. Tomorrow night, he would discover that assumption was wrong. Very, very wrong. Friday dawned gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what I knew would be one of the most dangerous nights of my life. Maya left for work at her usual time, kissing me goodbye and promising to call when her late shift ended at 10 p.m. Brandon played his part perfectly, expressing disappointment about another failed job interview and concern about our family's financial situation. He was attentive and helpful, offering to cook dinner and suggesting I take it easy after such a stressful week. "You know, Mom, Elena, you've been looking tired lately. Maybe you should get some extra rest tonight." "That's thoughtful of you," I replied, watching his face carefully. "I have been having trouble sleeping. Dr. Patterson mentioned I could try chamomile tea if the problem persisted." Brandon's eyes lit up with interest. "Chamomile tea is perfect for sleep issues. Very natural, very effective. I could make you a cup after dinner." That would be lovely. Dinner proceeded normally, with Brandon maintaining his facade of the caring son-in-law while I pretended to be an unsuspecting victim When we finished eating, he immediately offered to clean up. "You cooked. Mom, Elena, let me handle the dishes. You just relax." I retreated to the living room, but positioned myself where I could observe Brandon in the kitchen. I watched him prepare chamomile tea in my favorite mug and saw him palm something small and white, undoubtedly the crushed Ambien he planned to use. When he stirred the tea, his movements were deliberate and careful, ensuring complete dissolution of whatever drug he'd added. "Here you go," he said, presenting the mug with a warm smile. "This should help you get the best sleep you've had in weeks." I took a small sip to maintain appearances, but the liquid had a slightly bitter aftertaste that chamomile tea should never have. More concerning, I felt a subtle burning sensation on my tongue that suggested something much stronger than sleeping medication. Excusing myself to use the bathroom, I immediately spit out the tea and rinsed my mouth thoroughly. Then I used my phone to research drug interactions with my prescribed blood pressure medication. What I found made my blood run cold. Ambien combined with my beta blockers could cause severe respiratory depression, cardiac arrhythmias, and potentially fatal drops in blood pressure. For a 64-year-old woman, the combination could easily prove lethal. Brandon wasn't just planning to rob me. He was planning to kill me. I returned to the living room and continued pretending to drink the poison tea while actually pouring it into a potted plant when Brandon wasn't looking. Within 20 minutes, I began acting drowsy, complaining of fatigue and difficulty concentrating. "The tea is really working," I told Brandon, slurring my words slightly. "I can barely keep my eyes open." "That's perfect. Mom, Elena, you need deep, restorative sleep. Why don't you head upstairs and get comfortable?" I made a show of struggling to climb the stairs, gripping the railing and moving slowly. Brandon followed, ostensibly to help, but actually to observe my condition. "Will you be okay? You seem really out of it." "Just tired," I mumbled. This tea was exactly what I needed. In my bedroom, I changed into nightclothes and got into bed, breathing deeply and regularly to simulate the onset of drug-induced unconsciousness. Brandon lingered in my doorway, watching carefully. "Sleep well, Mom, Elena. I'll check on you later." For the next 2.5 hours, I lay motionless in my bed, monitoring Brandon's activities through sounds in the house. I heard him moving around downstairs, probably preparing tools for the robbery and gathering containers for stolen items. My hidden camera was recording everything, streaming to cloud storage as backup evidence. My phone was ready to call 911 at the first sign of immediate danger. At 9:15 p.m., Brandon climbed the stairs and entered my room. I controlled my breathing, maintaining the illusion of deep unconsciousness while he approached my bed. "Elena," he whispered. "Elena, can you hear me?" I remained motionless. Brandon waved his hand in front of my face, then gently shook my shoulder. When I didn't respond, he smiled with satisfaction. Maya's shift would end in 15 minutes, but Brandon clearly felt confident about his timeline. He went directly to my safe, used his copied key, and began removing cash, jewelry, and important documents, but he also took something I hadn't expected: my life insurance policies and will. As he photographed these documents with his phone, I realized the full scope of his plan. Brandon wasn't just stealing my current assets. He was documenting information that would help him access my life insurance benefits after my accidental death from a drug overdose. Then Brandon made the call that sealed his fate. "Derek, it's done. The old lady won't wake up until noon tomorrow. If she wakes up at all, got everything we discussed: cash, jewelry, and all the insurance paperwork. If she wakes up at all." The casual way he discussed my potential death made every muscle in my body tense with rage. "Maya will find her mother dead from an accidental overdose. Tragic. But these things happen with elderly people mixing medications. By the time anyone asks questions, we'll be in Mexico." I couldn't listen to another word, rising from my bed with the energy of righteous fury. I turned on my bedroom light and faced my would-be killer. "Surprise, Brandon. Your plan has some flaws." Brandon spun around, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and panic in rapid succession. The stolen items scattered from his hands as he stammered, "Elena, but you. The tea. You should be." "Dead. Yes, I know. Unfortunately for you, I didn't actually drink your poisoned tea." I held up my phone, showing the active recording app. "But I did record your entire confession." Brandon's mask finally slipped completely. The charming son-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and desperate. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. Those people Derek works for don't forgive debts. If I don't pay them, you'll find another victim, but it won't be me, and it won't be my daughter." Brandon lunged toward me, but I was ready. 30 years of investigating dangerous criminals had taught me to always have an escape plan. I pressed the speed dial for 911 while simultaneously triggering a personal alarm that would alert Mrs. Chen next door. "911, what's your emergency? This is Elena Mitchell at 247 Maple Street. I'm being attacked by an intruder attempting to poison and rob me. I need police immediately." Brandon froze as he heard sirens in the distance. In our small town, emergency response was fast, and Mrs. Chen had clearly called for backup the moment my alarm sounded. "You crazy old bitch," Brandon snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "You have no idea what you've done to your own daughter." "I've saved her from a murderer." Police lights flashed through my bedroom window as 3 patrol cars surrounded my house. Brandon stood in my bedroom, surrounded by evidence of his attempted crime, with no escape route and no believable explanation. As officers pounded on my front door, I looked at Brandon with the satisfaction of a hunter who had outmaneuvered a predator. "Did you really think a 64-year-old former insurance investigator would be an easy target?" Maya's Honda Civic pulled into my driveway just as police officers were escorting Brandon out of my house in handcuffs. The scene that greeted my daughter was every parent's nightmare: flashing lights, crime scene tape, and her husband being arrested for crimes she couldn't begin to comprehend. "Mom." Maya ran toward me, her face pale with terror. "What's happening? Are you hurt, Brandon? What's going on?" Officer Jennifer Martinez, who had taken my statement, intercepted Maya before she could reach Brandon. "Ma'am, you need to stay back while we process the scene." "Process what scene?" "This is my mother's house, Brandon. Tell them this is a mistake." Brandon, now in handcuffs, but still trying to manipulate the situation, called out desperately. "Maya, baby, your mother misunderstood something. This is all a big confusion. I was just checking on her because she seemed disoriented." "Enough," I said firmly, approaching my daughter. "Maya, sweetheart, you need to hear the truth about your husband." We sat in my living room while police processed evidence upstairs. Maya clutched my hands, her eyes darting between me and the officers, trying to understand how her world had suddenly shattered. "Mom, please explain what happened. There has to be some mistake." I pulled out my phone and found the recording from Brandon's late-night call. "Maya, I'm going to play something for you. It's going to be very difficult to hear, but you need to know who you married." Maya's face went white as Brandon's voice filled the room. "Yeah, it's Derek. The old bitch has way more than we thought." Maya suspects nothing. Still thinks I'm job hunting like a devoted husband. I'll drug her evening tea with crushed Ambien. Clean out all cash, jewelry, anything portable. "Stop," Maya whispered, but I continued the recording. "Trust me, by Thursday we'll be clear. I'll tell Maya we got a sudden job offer in another state. We'll be gone before the old lady fully realizes what happened." Maya's hands flew to her mouth as she heard her husband's casual dismissal of her love and trust, but the worst was yet to come. "Maya might have an accident if I don't pay up soon. If she wakes up at all, Maya will find her mother dead from an accidental overdose." The recording ended in silence. Maya stared at my phone as tears streamed down her face, her entire reality crumbling in real time. "He was going to kill you," she whispered, "and use me as an alibi." "Maya, you couldn't have known. Brandon is a professional con artist. This is what he does." But Maya wasn't listening. She was processing the full scope of her husband's betrayal, not just the planned murder and theft, but the months of lies about his job, their finances, and his feelings for her. "The gambling debts," she said slowly. "That's why he really lost his job, isn't it? That's why we lost our apartment, our savings." I nodded. "Brandon was fired for embezzlement. He's been lying about everything since the beginning." Maya stood up abruptly and walked to the window where Brandon sat in the back of a police car. For a long moment, she stared at the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted with her life and brought into her mother's home. When she turned back to me, something fundamental had changed in her expression. The naive trust was gone, replaced by a steely resolve I recognized from my own mirror. "I want to talk to him," she said quietly. Officer Martinez allowed Maya to approach the police car with supervision. I watched from my doorway as my daughter faced the man who had planned to murder her mother and destroy her life. "Maya, baby, you have to listen to me," Brandon began the moment she appeared. "Your mother is confused. I was trying to help her and she misinterpreted—" "Shut up." Maya's voice was ice cold. "Just shut up and listen." Brandon's eyes widened. He'd never heard Maya speak with such authority. "I heard the recording. Brandon, your whole plan. You were going to drug my mother, steal her money, and let me find her dead body. Then you were going to take me to Mexico as your alibi. The people I owe money to, they threatened you too. I was trying to protect. By planning to murder my mother." Maya's voice rose. "By letting me believe I was married to a decent man while you were planning felonies." Brandon tried one last manipulation. "Maya, we're married. We took vows, for better or worse. You broke those vows the moment you decided to commit murder." Maya turned away from the police car and walked back to me with steady steps. When she reached my side, she looked at Officer Martinez. "What charges will he face? Attempted murder, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit robbery, fraud. Your husband is looking at 15 to 20 years minimum." Maya nodded with grim satisfaction. "Good." As the police cars pulled away with Brandon and Derek Miller, who had been arrested simultaneously in a coordinated operation, Maya and I stood in my doorway watching our nightmare disappear into the night. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Maya whispered. "I brought a killer into your home." "You brought my daughter home," I replied, hugging her tight. "That's all that matters now." The courtroom was packed on the morning of Brandon's sentencing. Maya sat beside me in the front row, no longer the broken woman who had discovered her husband's true nature 2 months ago. She had transformed herself into someone stronger, more self-reliant, and absolutely determined to rebuild her life. Brandon, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and looking far removed from the charming man who had once fooled my daughter, avoided eye contact as the judge read his sentence. "Brandon Hayes, you have been found guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit robbery, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The court sentences you to 22 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Derek Miller, tried separately, received 30 years for his role as the mastermind behind multiple elder abuse schemes targeting vulnerable seniors across 3 states. When I testified during the trial, the prosecutor used my recorded evidence to build an airtight case. The jury heard Brandon's own voice describing his plan to drug me, steal my assets, and potentially cause my death. They saw the video footage of him entering my safe and stealing my belongings. But the most powerful moment came when Maya testified about her husband's psychological manipulation and the months of lies that had convinced her to trust a dangerous criminal. He made me believe I was protecting my mother by bringing him into her home. Maya told the court, "In reality, I was delivering a victim to a predator." The defense attorney tried to portray Brandon as a desperate man driven by gambling addiction, but the evidence was overwhelming. Brandon had planned and executed a sophisticated scheme that showed clear intent to harm an elderly victim. The case attracted significant media coverage, particularly because of my background as a former insurance investigator and the high-tech methods I'd used to catch Brandon. 64-year-old former investigator outsmarts con artist, read the headline in our local newspaper. I was interviewed by several news outlets about elder abuse prevention and the importance of trusting instincts when something feels wrong. Experience never retires. I told one reporter, "The skills I learned investigating fraud cases saved my life and exposed a criminal who would have hurt other families." The story inspired other seniors to be more vigilant about financial abuse and gave hope to families dealing with similar situations. Maya's divorce from Brandon was finalized on a sunny Tuesday morning in September. She emerged from the courthouse looking lighter, freer, and ready to embrace the future she would build on her own terms. "How does it feel?" I asked as we walked to our car. "Like I can breathe again," she replied. "For the first time in years, I know exactly who I am and what I want." Maya had thrived during the months following Brandon's arrest. She earned a promotion to dental hygienist supervisor at Dr. Morrison's practice, increasing her salary to $3,800 per month. She also joined a support group for victims of financial abuse, finding strength in helping other women recognize manipulation and rebuild their lives. "I want to stay with you permanently, if you'll have me," Maya told me one evening as we cooked dinner together. "Not because I need to, but because I want to. We make a good team." We renovated the house to accommodate our new living arrangement. I moved my bedroom downstairs to give Maya privacy and independence upstairs, while still maintaining our shared family spaces. It was the perfect balance of togetherness and autonomy. The experience with Brandon had awakened something in me that retirement had suppressed. I missed using my investigative skills for meaningful work, and the positive response to my media interviews gave me an idea. I partnered with Detective Sarah Wong to start a consulting business called Silver Shield Protection, specializing in elder abuse prevention and financial fraud education. We offered workshops at community centers, assisted law enforcement with complex fraud cases, and provided security assessments for seniors concerned about their safety. The work was fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. Every elderly person we helped avoid a scam. Every family we educated about warning signs felt like a victory against predators like Brandon and Derek Miller. 3 months after Brandon's sentencing, I met Robert Chen at one of my community workshops. At 67, Robert was a retired bank manager whose wife had passed away 2 years earlier. He attended my presentation on financial fraud prevention and approached me afterward with thoughtful questions about protecting elderly clients. Our friendship developed slowly and naturally. Robert appreciated my independence and intelligence, while I enjoyed his gentle humor and deep integrity. We began meeting for coffee, then dinner, then long walks around Millbrook, discussing everything from current events to our children's lives. "You're remarkable, Elena," Robert told me one evening as we watched sunset from my back patio. "The way you protected yourself and Maya, the strength you've shown. I've never met anyone like you." "I'm just a woman who refused to be a victim," I replied. "Nothing remarkable about that." "Everything remarkable about that." When Maya announced she was dating Alex Rodriguez, a 34-year-old accountant she'd met through her support group, I was cautiously optimistic. Alex was everything Brandon hadn't been honest about his finances, transparent about his past, and genuinely supportive of Maya's independence. He's the opposite of Brandon in every way, Maya told me after their third date. When I told him about what happened, he didn't try to fix me or minimize my experience. He just listened and said he was proud of how strong I'd become. 1 year after Brandon's arrest, we hosted our first major family dinner in the renovated house. Maya and Alex sat across from Robert and me, sharing stories and laughter around the same table where Brandon had once interrogated me about my security measures. During dessert, Maya made an announcement that filled my heart with joy. Alex and I have some news. We're engaged. She showed us a simple, elegant ring that Alex had chosen with care and consideration for her preferences. Nothing flashy or expensive, just a symbol of genuine love and commitment. "When's the wedding?" I asked, already mentally planning celebrations. "Next spring. And Mom, we want you to walk me down the aisle. You're the one who saved me from a terrible mistake and showed me what real strength looks like." As I looked around my dining room that evening, Maya glowing with genuine happiness, Alex treating her with the respect she deserved, Robert reaching for my hand with affection and partnership, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed. Brandon had entered my home planning to destroy my family through manipulation, theft, and potentially murder. Instead, his criminal behavior had ultimately strengthened the bond between Maya and me, helped us both discover inner strength we didn't know we possessed, and opened doors to new relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. "This house has seen manipulation and lies," I said, raising my wine glass. "Now it's filled with truth and love." As we toasted to new beginnings, I caught sight of the framed newspaper article hanging in my hallway. "Local woman's quick thinking prevents elder abuse crime." Below it hung my certificate of appreciation from the State Attorney General's office for my contribution to elder protection advocacy. Epilogue. 2 years later. As I write this story, Maya and Alex are happily married and expecting their first child. They've bought a house 3 blocks away, close enough for family support, far enough for independence. Alex has become the son-in-law I always hoped Maya would find kind, honest, and completely devoted to her happiness. Robert and I married in a small ceremony last fall, combining our lives and our families with the wisdom that comes from having survived previous losses. We travel together, work on Silver Shield protection cases together, and enjoy the peaceful contentment of a love built on genuine partnership. Brandon is serving his sentence in state prison. I heard through legal channels that he's attempted to contact Maya several times, but she has never responded. She's moved forward completely, creating a life filled with purpose and authentic relationships. Sometimes people ask me if I ever feel guilty about the trap I set for Brandon, or whether I should have simply called police when I first suspected his intentions. My answer is always the same. Predators count on their victims being too polite, too trusting, or too frightened to fight back effectively. Brandon thought he was hunting a helpless old woman. Instead, he found a warrior who refused to let him destroy 2 innocent lives. They thought it was a great idea to rob me. I thought it was a great idea to prove them wrong.